Hi, my name is Dwayne Gathers, and welcome to CivitasLA, featuring diverse and emerging leaders who make up this dynamic region and are creating community every day and building a better tomorrow. These bi-weekly conversations enable us to hear from, learn from, and be inspired by a new generation of civic entrepreneurs who are forging a path forward in making our region a stronger, more resilient, and connected group of citizens. Our goal is to elevate civic discourse, foster community connections, and promote civic knowledge and engagement across the greater Los Angeles region while elevating diverse and emerging voices in that conversation. As we learned in episode 76 with Leticia Buckley of La Plaza de Cultura y Artes, the story of Los Angeles is inextricably connected to the story of Mexicans, Mexican Americans, and Latinos in our region. And we certainly invite you to go back and hear that conversation about this amazing museum and cultural organization based in downtown Los Angeles. Located just 3 miles east of downtown Los Angeles, no community's story is more tied to our region's history than Boyle Heights. Part of the original Spanish land grant that established the city of Los Angeles in 1781, covering roughly 6.5 square miles, Boyle Heights is one of LA's oldest and most historically significant communities. Historically, it's been home to generations of immigrants, being called the Ellis Island of the West, serving as home to some of LA's largest populations of Japanese and Jewish residents in Southern California, as well as significant groups of African Americans, Italians, and Polish migrants. So as CivitasLA continues to celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month 2022, I'm delighted to offer our newest community spotlight, Boyle Heights, as we explore this unique community, consider its rich history, its place at the center of the Latino experience in Los Angeles, and central role in Chicano culture and social justice movements. And with me in studio today are two individuals with deep connections to this community. I'm joined today by Josefina Lopez, founding Artistic Director of Casa 0101 Theater and screenwriter, as well as Alfred Fraijo Jr., noted attorney and community leader. Alfred, Josefina, bienvenidos a CivitasLA.
Gracias.
Did I get that right? Did I get that right?
Yes,
Okay.
Now we can start celebrating Latino Heritage Month.
I appreciate that. Josefina, Alfred, on CivitasLA, we always appreciate if you, our guests, will offer a brief personal introduction before we jump into our conversation. Ms. Lopez.
Introduce myself? Well,
Yes.
some people call me a Renaissance woman because I do, I'm also a trained chef from Cordon Bleu. I am a playwright, screenwriter. I'm also a painter. But I am a troublemaker, just like you, Alfredo.
Okay.
We are troublemakers. We're provocateurs. I am a provocateur because I realize that as a writer, I am a mirror to society. And, sometimes they kill writers and poets, right? But that's okay because someone needs to tell society the truth. Someone needs to have the courage. And sometimes, I am the sacrificial lamb where they go, okay, she's crazy, está loca, burn her at the stake. I am that person. And I'll fight for my community. I do see myself as a guardian of Boyle Heights. I would say in this conversation, that would be the way I would introduce myself. One of the guardians of Boyle Heights.
Outstanding. Alfred, welcome to CivitasLA. Give us a brief personal introduction.
I love it. Thank you. First of all, CivitasLA and Dwayne, thank you for featuring important brown stories, Latino stories, stories about creative Renaissance truth tellers and visionaries like Josefina. It's an honor to be in dialogue with her. I so admire your work and would like to honor that by continuing to do good work in the community. That is really the story of Boyle Heights. It's a story of people that are change makers, that are hardworking, that are creative, that are trying to carry and bring up families that are at the margins in many respects. In my work, we're going to talk about my experience in Boyle Heights, but I mentioned that because that's what informs my work as an attorney, as a community leader, as someone that's engaged in wanting to make a difference. So delighted to be here. I got a chance to organize and a group of folks and founded a nonprofit that's doing important work in the community. So delighted to be able to share that story as well, Dwayne.
No, and we look forward to hearing more about that. So this is interesting. We've had a number of community spotlights from, Venice, Leimert Park, Glendale, et cetera. And we've had some elected officials on and other community representatives, and they've all sort of migrated to that place and become involved. But you all go much further back in that you were actually raised in this community. So not suggesting that you all are older these days, but you are older, but you've been there for a lot of years.
We are the wise elders.
You're the elders
of our community.
I like
That's
that.
how I reframe things. I'm not old. I am a wise woman.
Excellent. So tell me, this is just as you've been there for many years. You grew up there. You live there currently. Tell us about what Boyle Heights meant to you as a young person, and how that your engagement with community has evolved.
Well, see, I grew up undocumented, so I didn't feel I belonged to Mexico, and I didn't feel I belonged to the U.S.
Okay.
So for me, Boyle Heights was my refuge.
Okay.
It really is the Ellis Island. It was the one place where I felt at home, where I didn't need a green card, where I could just be. So for me, Boyle Heights is not just about, a community with buildings. Boyle Heights is home. It's familia. It's the one place in the world where I belong. So that's how come, for me, I'm very much a guardian of Boyle Heights, because there's so many amazing stories. For me, it really represents home. And I know for a lot of people, when I was growing up, especially as I got older, people would refer to it as a really violent place. And I didn't know there were 87 gangs, because I lived in an intact family where I have 7 brothers and sisters. So I guess we can call ourselves a gang. I don't know. Maybe I wasn't a gang and I didn't know it. No, but I felt like community. I felt home. I never felt scared. I never felt threatened. All the things I saw in the movies were so ridiculous to me, because it was never my reality. Mm-hmm. And so that's how come I have fought to show the beautiful stories that are missing in Hollywood stories, because Hollywood will not tell these stories. Right. We are the bad guy. We are the villain in Hollywood stories, And even when they do stories about our community, it's always about the cholos. Mm-hmm. Rarely. That's how come I think my movie, sadly and happily, my movie is very unique, because it actually looks at the bond between a mother and daughter. Mm-hmm. It looks at a family dynamic and machismo, and explores other themes besides gang violence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Alfred, what was Boyle Heights like for you as a young kid?
Well, I say that I was raised in Boyle Heights. I came to Boyle Heights in diapers. My dad and my mom moved to Boyle Heights from the San Gabriel Valley, from the Rosemead area. And my father was a truck driver. He was a teamster. And he had, at that time, was making decent salary. So I remember actually getting a chance to rent our own house. We were living with our grandmother and moved to Boyle Heights. We moved to right just on 7th Street and Soto. And we had our own place. We were right at the entrance of the 5 freeway. You guys may know where that's at. Mm-hmm. I went to Soto Street Elementary School. I went to Hollenbeck Middle School, and I graduated from Roosevelt High School. And like Josefina, like fish and water, you don't know the difference when you're in the community. I didn't really know that I had been growing up and living under the poverty line or the statistics at the national level until I went to college. I got accepted to Harvard and got on a plane for the first time and went to the East Coast. But my experience in Boyle Heights, people tell me, well, where exactly did you live, I mentioned 7th Street and Soto, but I lived everywhere. It was wherever there was cheap apartment, cheap rent. My father and my mother separated when I was 8 years old, and so my mother raised us as a single mom. And she was hardworking and brought us up with the conviction that we could be anything. And I think that is an important inheritance that I have, the idea of reinvention. Yeah. And Boyle Heights is in many ways about reinvention. It's about change, and it's about pursuing that opportunity. It's the American story. And I have to say that moving out of Boyle Heights is when going to college and getting a chance to work in downtown. I remember being with my colleagues in a fancy law firm and them talking about Boyle Heights and repeating the same tropes and stereotypes that we see in the media, that we see in movies, and having the opportunity to articulate a difference, something that was entirely not my experience, and getting a chance to talk about my own narrative in a different way. And for me, that's been really important, which is why I think these kinds of conversations are critical to begin to shift the perspective and shift the narrative and speak from a position of strength and a position of abundance.
Yeah.
So much of what we talk about is a struggle and it is about scarcity, but I didn't grow up in that. That was not my experience.
Well, just to digress a little bit, that's why I really simply loved the series by Issa Rae, Insecure, because I think she covered South LA from a point of view of citizens engaging with each other, and it wasn't just a struggle story of South Los Angeles. I think that's important to share. You've been there for a number of decades now, and you talked about reinvention and change and community and Boyle Heights itself. What does the community look like to you today versus those days as not civically engaged young person just growing up and living there?
I see a lot of beautiful things. I see how much more active, we are as a community, because we are the one community who has fought back against gentrification. I'm working with Dr. George Sanchez, he's a history professor at USC on the Boyle Heights Museum, and he's taught me a lot of things. He said that Boyle Heights is the first Latino community on record in the world who has fought back against gentrification using the arts. And part of it is because there's a lot of people who, like me, are empowered, are educated. We feel like we can advocate for our community. And so I do see a lot of beautiful things with our community, but I also see a lot of the IKEA-fication of buildings. So, when I see the sideways fences, the gray and white and the blandness of architecture in my community, I see where, I see what's happening there too. I tell people Boyle Heights is not a blank canvas. Boyle Heights, what's at stake here is that there are so many amazing multicultural histories. And to me, the threat of IKEA-fication of our buildings and our community is that we're erasing American history. We're erasing all this incredible Jewish American history, Italian history, Japanese history, Mexican American, all these amazing histories. That's what's at stake. I'm a storyteller. For me, I do not want to lose these stories. So I see people like me and other activists who are trying to quickly capture them through theater, through paintings, through murals, through poetry, because we do not want to lose this. We want to preserve these things. But I also see that, because of the efforts of some activists, but also, some people say, oh my God, you've taken it to extreme, like poor white people, they're just trying to open cafes in your neighborhood. They're not trying to take over your culture, you're discriminating against white people. And, I've heard all that, right? Oh, Chicanos are just angry, mean people who don't want culture. And I've had to fight that and say, no. All these galleries coming in, they're not coming in to bring culture to our community. They're coming in because they ran out of real estate on the other side of the river. They're not asking the artists in this community, hey, show us your work because maybe we can exhibit you because we'd like to be part of this community, right? They don't even look at Chicano art as real art, right? So then, I studied art history for that very reason because I wanted to understand what was happening with the art galleries. And in the history of art, Boyle Heights is the first community who has fought back against galleries, against the art world. Yeah. So we have done a lot of firsts. So that's why, because we're, I don't know if I can say this word on the radio. Well, it's not radio, right? It's not FTC.
No.
There's a word called chingones, like kick-ass, And so I do see that people are cautious about just coming into Boyle Heights and just building, breaking down, taking things, because they're aware that if they don't consult the community and say, hey, how can we move in and how can we give back? There has to be an exchange, right? People say, how do you know you're gentrifying? I mean, is it automatically mean you're a white person and you gentrify? Says, no, you could be Latino and you can gentrify. Right. You can be a wealthy Latino who comes in and says, I don't care, I'm going to turn this and do whatever I want, and I'm going to call the police on my neighbors who are having a quinceañera, Right. Because I don't care. They're disturbing my sleep, So it's about an awareness that you come into a community that already has a history, that already has, it's almost like a painting, and you can't take your white brush and paint all over your, and create a blank canvas and decide that you get to decide what images are there, because they're already images. So you can decide to add your color, you can decide to add things, but respect what is already there. Because some of us do love the mobile vendors, the paleteros, the taquerias. Some of us love Boyle Heights because it does remind us of Mexico. And some of us do go, wow, it's so great that my neighbor gets to celebrate, quinceañeras, bautismos, weddings, and everything in their backyard because they work so hard because they're working class people. So they have nothing else except parties in their backyard. And if I call the police and get them killed, well, you know what? I'm gentrifying, even if I'm not bringing in a lot of money or doing the typical things of a gentrifier or a hipster. So it's about an awareness of how do we respect the economics of a community? Because gentrification happens when people from a higher economic echelon come into a working class neighborhood. And then by paying higher taxes on their buildings, they create this domino effect that raises the property taxes for everyone. And then, when developers see this, they're like, oh my God, I guess hipsters and artists and all these, people aren't scared to live in the barrio. So guess what? I'm going to take these buildings, like what has happened, for instance, there was a building full of mariachis and someone bought it. And then one by one, they started kicking out all these mariachis. But they were exploiting the fact that Mariachi Plaza was like a block and a half away, right? And they were calling it Mariachi Crossing, which doesn't exist. The city does not recognize that term. But they were totally exploiting the cultural currency that mariachis were bringing to the community and yet kicking them out one by one, strategically, going after the most vulnerable tenants, right? And so when you come in and say, oh, wow, here's all this interesting culture that's edgy, and I'm going to take advantage of this, but I'm not going to give back. There is no exchange. I'm not going to provide jobs. I'm not going to provide opportunities. Then you are gentrifying.
Yeah. Well, certainly, I think you're working on a History of Boyle Heights project now as well.
Yes, it's called Remembering Boyle Heights. I did part 1 in 2018, and we're going to do part 2 in November.
Well, I'm glad you referenced Professor Sanchez at USC. But so given that you are a historian then, we always like to share with our audience.
He's a historian. I'm just like the pseudo-historian. I'm becoming one. I'm actually going, maybe I should go get a PhD at USC because you know what? I know so much now that...
But given that we have a lot of listeners not in LA, I always love to share on Community Spotlights a short history as best we can share it of the community. And certainly Boyle Heights history, dates back again. We can talk about all these national and regional and international happenings, whether it's Japanese internment, suburbanization, the western growth of our city, the advent of freeways, which splintered communities. So there was a lot that's happened that Boyle Heights has been on the forefront of. So share with our audience, in your mind, some of the highlights of Boyle Heights history. And Alfred, you can jump into as well. But Josefina, please.
Oh my God, there's just so much. I'm trying to sit down and write the second part too. Yeah. And for me, I came up with a list of the most important things that have happened. And the first thing that comes to mind is, if I were to tell you what my play's about, we start off with the Zoot Suit riots because that's when I think we become Mexicans to Mexican Americans to Chicanos.
Okay.
And that when there was this sense of pride, no, I'm not going to be your Mexican servant. I am here to celebrate myself, and to me the Pachuco and the Tacuche and them saying, no, I matter. I am somebody. That act of resistance of dressing yourself in a way that celebrates you was kind of the beginning of the Chicano history. Maybe some other people would argue we're doing a lot more, but I would say that is interesting. And, our theater is right across the street from Hollenbeck Police Station.
Okay.
Which is where they booked a lot of the young men who were stripped naked by the sailors, during World War II at the movie theater. They were booked there.
Wow.
Right? So we're right across. So our theater has a responsibility to tell the story, right? So I would say that's one. The other one would be the walkouts, right? The walkouts at Roosevelt, because that's also another act that people took to affirm the humanity and the right to sovereignty over themselves and an education to demand more for themselves.
And what period are we talking about here?
We're talking the 60s.
60s, okay.
Yeah,
gotcha.
68.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, right? So I would say those two. And then, the other big thing that happened in Boyle Heights is, we, a couple years ago, I was the host for the Dolores Huerta Square. In Boyle Heights, and I was so privileged to be the host of the event, or the MC, I should say. And what's so amazing is that Dolores Huerta and Cesar Chavez met at the CSO, in that building on First and Chicago, right?
I know that.
Yes, that's where they met, and thanks to the Jewish American community, right? And I forget the name. I think his name was Frank Ross. He realized that as Jewish Americans, they were not going to get their needs met, their goals met politically and justice for their community. They had to partner up with the Mexican American community because they had the education, they had certain things in place, but they didn't have the numbers. So they had to empower the Mexican American community to get a leader. And so they elected Edward Roybal, who became the first councilman.
Wow.
Who then challenged the housing covenants that prevented Jewish American people in Los Angeles from moving west of the LA River to living west of the LA River, right? So then he also was empowering people through the CSO, right? And that's where where Dolores Huerta and Cesar Chavez met.
Okay.
Right? So
That's
that
amazing.
moment of these two people coming together really has changed the history of Mexican Americans and, and Chicano
Civil
history,
rights
right?
movement, absolutely.
It's so important,
Sure.
right? I mean, si se puede, right? Yes, we
Yes,
can,
yes.
right? Dolores Huerta. So that's a moment that I'm celebrating. Another thing was Mothers of CivitasLA, right? Mothers realizing that you cannot build a prison in our community, and the fact that there's such an injustice connected to the environment, the fact that there are all these freeways in Boyle Heights that really lower our level, that affect our lungs, that really take away so many years from the residents. So that women standing up. There's also, I would say, Homeboy Industries. I would say Father Greg Boyle coming into Boyle Heights and realizing that nothing stops a bullet that more than a job,
Right,
and that, I mean, there's just so much. Obviously, I'd like to think that I made her story and history by opening a theater and producing over 200 plays about the Latino Mexican experience, Chicano experience, and also LGBTQ Latino experience in Boyle Heights.
Well, certainly, Boyle Heights' history is really woven indelibly into the fabric of the Chicano movement and Black Power movement of the 60s, and a lot of political and student activism. Alfred, how did this impact you? You're growing up in Boyle Heights. Your decision to go into law, et cetera.
So, so much to talk about, and I appreciate even learning some new stories from my community with the meeting of Cesar and Dolores in Boyle Heights. That's incredible. For me, Boyle Heights is a story of bridges and freeways in many ways. It is the historic racist legacy land use decisions that were done by older white men in downtown and reflected, obviously, the exploitation and the discrimination through the built environment. So I grew up intimately familiar with that, with the disparate impact, environmental, health, et cetera, that the infrastructure that was built in Boyle Heights through displacement, the urban renewal policies that built a lot of housing projects that were undercapitalized and lacked the resources that would be now entirely criminal. And so that's also the legacy of Boyle Heights. We've seen a lot of important changes. For me, as a land use attorney, I have chosen to use land use as a tool for social justice. I think the built environment can dictate the health of communities. And so I'm very proud of working in that space. I went to law school because I wanted to be a civil rights attorney. I wanted to be like Antonio Hernandez at Meldef. That's what I wanted to do. And I had read about the work that she did, of course, representing the women that were sterilized at the General Hospital. That's another important story.
We're dramatizing that story in the play because it's a very important story.
And that's, I think, also something that's critical, Dwayne, in the sense that what we are talking about is talking about these stories that need to be retold. That are stories that we hope inspire younger generations, because it's stories that really, I think the central to those stories is the sense of agency. Having the awareness that you can change the community that you're in, that you can stand up and make a difference, I think is really important. Growing up, we don't see those examples, as we mentioned. That's why the art that's being created in our community that reflects the stories and that reflects the bodies and the images that represent us, that humanize us, that give us a sense of meaning, is so critical. So for me, I'm passionate about the arts. I'm not an artist, but I see the importance of art in storytelling. It's not a coincidence that we're talking about and talking with Josefina because we have so many examples of Chicana, Latina women that have been at the forefront of our movement through poetry, through art, through literature. And they've been central to that. And I think it's very important to recognize that.
Well, certainly, I want to talk about Josefina's work in the arts and the importance of arts and culture to this particular community and to our city as a whole. But also, you touched on your work in land use. So as we think about, in these spotlights, we always talk about, what are the big conversations that people are having today in community? And certainly, what I detect is the issue that's happening in a number of communities around the region, which is around gentrification and displacement. One article that I noted from the LA Times a couple of years ago said, quote unquote, residents are concerned about the possibility of widespread gentrification, which has led to some friction as the market has heated up. And this was back in May of 2016, so that seems to me an understatement. And certainly, Alfred, you've worked with a number of significant developers, whether for-profit, affordable housing, et cetera. How do you view this conversation overall, and how do you view it as it's taking place, particularly within Boyle Heights?
Can I interject?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. And maybe you can help me clarify this. But let's talk about what it means to have affordable housing, right? One of the things I learned, right, Dr. George Sanchez has a lot of PhD candidates, and so they do dissertations on gentrification and Chicano. It's great. And I remember reading one of the dissertations, and he pointed out that the median income for Los Angeles is $44,000, right? $44,000, right? As an artist, I never made that money, right? And what's sad is that affordable housing is $44,000, right? Which means that people who really can't afford housing can't even afford affordable housing. So I think that's the misconception, is that when people say, we're going to build affordable housing in your community. And here's the thing, is that you're competing with everybody in Los Angeles for affordable housing if you're making $44,000. In Boyle Heights is the average income, maybe it's gotten worse probably because most of the essential workers that died were in Boyle Heights, like majority, right? And obviously African Americans, right? But it's $17,000.
Wow.
Right? So when people say, isn't that great? We're building affordable housing. For whom? Because the people in Boyle Heights get displaced. They don't get to go back because they can't even compete for affordable housing.
Yeah.
That's
and Alfred, I know you work with the development community, so you're deeply involved in these conversations and decisions. Give me your thoughts on this.
Of course. I do work with a lot of developers that are building affordable housing, and that's a reality, right? That Josefina just mentioned, which is affordable housing is highly regulated, and the target incomes don't reflect, in many respects, the incomes of the communities in certainly the families in Boyle Heights. So when we talk about affordability, we need to be mindful of the fact that it doesn't capture everybody.
Right.
And so I just came from a trip to Vienna. I was in Vienna for a week learning the Vienna social housing model, which is now celebrating 100 years of existence. And it started as a socialist model. It started by the fact that people were living in the streets, didn't have a place to live, and they acknowledged the fact that, and as I learned today, in the experience that I'm bringing back to LA, is their concept of housing is very different from us. Fundamentally, it's about understanding that housing is a human right, understanding that everybody deserves housing, that you don't earn housing, that you as a fact that you're an Angelino working here, that you deserve a dignified place to live. And it's the responsibility of everybody to be able to provide that housing. And when we shift the narrative and shift the perspective on the fact that this American notion that you have to work hard and you have to be deserving of the things that you get is backwards, right? Because the reality of it is the system is fixed. And you're not, by virtue of being an American, able to make it right? That's not the case in the United States, because if you're queer, you're brown, or you're black, the challenges that you have are sometimes insurmountable. And you can work as hard as you can and still not make it. And so when we acknowledge those two facts, that housing is a human right and that we have a system that disadvantages the poor, that disadvantages people of color, you start to think differently about how you build and fund housing, okay? That's one. Two is that the affordable housing model that we have is clearly not working. We still have so many people at the risk of either losing their home or living in the streets. And so we have to come to terms with the fact that the policies that we've currently been implementing, both in regards to the affordable housing clients that I represent, the developers, and the government that continues to pass laws, that continues to promote a certain type of housing and typology, needs to be needs to be blown up, and we need to do something differently.
Do the developers receive public funds?
Yes, that's the only way they build the affordable housing. They receive tax credits. They receive other types of funding.
How do they ensure that working class people get access to those?
So they're obviously they're building housing, as you mentioned, that's rent restricted, right? So the programs, the funding sources require that they allocate certain units to specific types of rental targets.
With the same entrance, right? Not separate entrances?
With the same entrance.
Yeah, we haven't gone down that path yet. That was happening in some cities like New York, that they were having separate
With
entrances.
the back door, right.
Yeah.
Or segregated or in a different building. No, the policy in Los Angeles is that it be integrated. But my point is, and that's closer to what I understand you're saying, Josefina, is that, hey, the housing that we're building is still not meeting the need of our community, right? One of the things that we learned from the pandemic, and that I think government got right, is that we can't continue to do the same things and expect a different result. And so they've started to innovate around how we access housing and underutilized properties in a way that's creative, that doesn't go through a lengthy permitting process, that brings the housing opportunities much quicker to the communities that need it. So that's one thing. The other thing is that we're not waiting for the government to give us a handout. There are organizations in our community that are thinking differently about land ownership, that are not thinking about owning land as an opportunity to extract value from the neighborhood. It's an opportunity to give people a dignified equity stake in their own housing unit. So there's a community land trust, there's cooperatives, there's other models that we're introducing out of necessity and the creative spirit that we have in our neighborhoods. So we're not waiting for, we say, no voy a pedir permiso, right? We're not waiting for the approval of government. We're going to do it ourselves. And that's, I think, an important aspect of this. My family, my mother, was abandoned by her birth mother, was abandoned by her birth father. She was adopted by a tia, was raised in Tijuana, given a different name, and given a story of where she came from. She didn't meet her father until he was in his deathbed.
Wow.
Okay? And she came to the States because she met my dad at a funeral in Tijuana and crossed the border. She was a seasonal farm worker, and at 15 she got married, and she came to the States.
Wow.
Okay? I mentioned that story because our community is so powerful. We are about reinventing ourselves. I believe that strongly, and that the station of where you were born doesn't necessarily dictate where you end up. My mother always told me that, right? And in the same way that we're talking about all these seemingly intractable challenges that we have on the issue of affordability, on the challenges that we have about open space, on the challenges that we have about the informal economy, we are doing it ourselves. I started an organization over 10 years ago called Inclusive Action for the City. It's an economic development organization. And we started with the basic premise that the answers to our problems were in our community.
Reside within,
we didn't
for sure.
have to go to City Hall and ask for permission. We didn't have to go to Sacramento and ask them what was the right way to build local economies that were resilient and that were reflective of the market demands. We went to our señoras, the vendedoras, and asked them, how are you doing the work? What do you need? And what we learned was there was a gap. A lot of organizations were organizing the vendedores and giving them loans to buy supplies and buy the carts. Some of them were also giving them counseling, et cetera, and giving them opportunities for self-empowerment. But what we understood from those conversations was that no matter how much resources we gave them, the act of mobile vending was illegal.
Okay.
So they would go out to the streets with their new cart and they would get confiscated, they would get thrown into jail, or worse, they would get deported. So our organization focused on that gap. It was legalizing, which, by the way, mobile vending was legal 120 years ago in Los Angeles. We had thousands of permits that we gave up to our vendedores. For some reason that changed and it became a negative thing. But we know that it promotes the economy, it makes our streets safer. Why? Because we know as a community that's what we need as a healthy, thriving community, and it should not be illegal.
Yeah.
So our objective was to change the minds in the rules. It wasn't to change our community.
Right.
It was to enable the creativity and the ingenuity and the entrepreneurship that we see in our community to thrive. That's my task as a lawyer, right? To see how I can be helpful in enabling what I know is already an incredible resource.
See, that's a very good point in that our community is not poor, it's under-resourced. I'll give you an example. My ex-husband and I opened a restaurant called Casa Fina. And we tried to get a liquor license and an entertainment license. And so I remember when we started doing poetry nights, we had Vice come in and tell us we couldn't do poetry nights.
Really?
And it was a packed restaurant we were talking about the moratorium, and it was a really huge community building event because we didn't have an entertainment license, right? And I'm like, we need a license to do poetry. Isn't that covered under freedom of speech? And they're like, no, because, you're in a restaurant. And then, if you have a wine and beer license and you can't have both. And like, we can't have poetry and wine and beer. Why? Because it's going to, rouse the natives and, they're going to overthrow the government. Why? 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 What's so scary about poetry, right? Well, you should be afraid of poets. But anyway, so we had to jump through so many hoops to get an entertainment license as well as a liquor license. And I said, oh my God, only people with huge pockets and corporations can thrive in Boyle Heights.
Absolutely.
People in the community themselves cannot thrive. They made it because one is you have to have parking to open a restaurant. And that community was not built it was built for the servants. It wasn't built for people with cars. So it was created in a way where there was no afterthought. We're like, oh no, these are our servants. They crossed the river. They don't need entertainment. They don't need... There was more moratoriums on liquor licenses because of the gang violence. I understand that. But I'm saying I'm trying to run, a restaurant where we do poetry, we do karaoke, we do entertainment. We inspire the community because our community, a lot of us cannot leave Boyle Heights to get all these amazing things that everybody else gets to have, like going to the theater and having a nice meal and being inspired. And we're trying to do that. And they wouldn't. We couldn't even open a theater because we couldn't guarantee parking. And I'm like, well, you made it so that nobody. I said, you know why there's 87 gangs? Because they don't need permits.
Right.
I'm trying to do everything right for my community, and you're telling me I need parking permit. I need a permit for this. I need a permit for that. I'm just trying to inspire the community. It's really heartbreaking when you see how many obstacles are there. You go, damn, you really have to be so crazy or inspired to say, no, I'm still going to do it.
Yeah.
We managed to do it. Now we do have stand-up comedy at the restaurant. But I go, nobody's in Beverly Hills telling people they can't do poetry. They can't do all this stuff that every other neighborhood can do it except for Boyle Heights.
Yeah.
So we're just under-resourced.
And that's a great... that's a great sort of example of my professional journey, is that I recognize that I have an incredible privilege of being educated and having a law degree and working with clients that are resourced, that have the capital to be able to hire a professional to solve their problems. And I learned intimately the incredible barriers that under-resourced communities have, not just the awareness and the knowledge of the rules, but also the fact that there's been historic underinvestment in our communities, whether it's about parking or whether it's about public transportation or whether it's about resources on how do you open a brick and mortar shop in our community. There are incredible barriers. But we're making it happen. We're making that happen. And I think for me, one thing that's very important, understanding how the system works, is leveraging that experience and bringing it to my community. I'll give you a concrete example. I believe strongly that if you don't own your property where your business is, you don't own your business.
Okay.
You are at incredible risk of being displaced. That's the reality of it. And so for me, it was very important for save my money and buy a piece of real estate in Boyle Heights and look at opportunities at how it could serve the community, but starting with property ownership first. I went to see one of my friends at Inner City Struggle before I brought the property, and I went into their offices, and there was a bunch of boxes all over the place. And I asked Lupe at the time, I'm like, what's happening? ¿Qué está pasando? And she's like, Alfred, we're getting kicked out. We can't pay the rent. We got to move further east. I'm like, but wait, you're serving the Sunrise Elementary School. You're right next door. The community that you're serving is right here. She's like, yeah, but we can't pay the rent. And that's a story that's replicated throughout our community, where landlords are extracting additional value and increasing the rents.
A story, okay? So there's a building, and I won't describe too much, but just to make the point, there's a building on First Street that's empty. It's been empty for about maybe 7 years now, right? That building, I thought, that could be the Boyle Heights Museum building because it's like a couple doors down from, Mariachi Plaza and Casa Fina and all these amazing restaurants. And I go to find out that they're asking an outrageous price that it's the same amount that they would ask in Westwood, like in a main prime area.
Right, yeah.
And I'm talking to the real estate agent who is Latino. And I said, can you explain to me how that's possible? Like nobody can afford that except for like Starbucks, maybe Starbucks, And he goes, I know. You see, the landlord doesn't want to give anybody a lease because he's afraid, as the prices are rising, that he's going to be stuck with someone and then he can't raise. So he's making it so impossible for anyone to come in unless they're willing to pay this amount of money because, he doesn't care. He can afford it. He's rich and he lives in Westwood and he, it doesn't matter. It's not his community. And I'm like, but what if he just rents it to me for like a year or two? Because then I can start, just the Boyle Heights Museum. That way people see his building. And then that way, I leave in 2 years. And he's like, no, he won't even do that. Yeah. And I'm like, but then he doesn't want anybody from the community to have it. He goes, no, he's not. All these people do not live in the community, so they don't care. Yeah. Most of the, people who own a lot of the buildings are children who, who don't care because they're not connected.
Yeah. Another conversation that's happening that I read a lot about in the LA Times. I also need to read the East Sider more often, but certainly the LA Times has had a lot of stories of late on the new bridge opening, the 6th Street Viaduct, and what that means to community. And certainly it's been described as a critical piece of social infrastructure within the community. A lot of stories on the bridge. What are your perspectives on the history of the bridge and the role that it's played in the history of Boyle Heights? I'm interested.
I was actually an arts commissioner on public art and architecture. So I actually was on the committee that approved the design for the bridge.
Okay.
And of course, I realized that it's not really a real serious position, but they have to kind of put it through the commission, right? And they basically wanted a rubber stamp, like approve it and move on, because they wanted to start building. And being the only Latina on the committee, I started bringing up these questions. And I said, what have you done to assure that people are not going to commit suicide on this bridge? Because it's such a beautiful bridge that you have so many actors whose careers are not going to go well that they're going to choose this bridge to jump over. Wow. I'm an artist. I'm an activist. I'm a healer. I think this way. So, of course, the engineers, the architects, and they're looking at me like, why is this lady asking us stuff that, like, we don't know how to answer? So all they say is, well, we built a 10-foot gate that stops. We did the requirements. And I said, okay, yeah, but what did you do? I basically brought up all these concerns, right? Being like one ethnic person. There was another African-American woman who was like, yeah, that's a good point, Josefina, And she was saying, and I was saying, because this bridge represents the wave of gentrification that's coming to our neighborhood. What about having a museum that welcomes people into Boyle Heights and lets people know that, look, you're coming into Boyle Heights. This isn't an extension of the arts district, right? It doesn't mean you can come over and knock us down and take over. And I said, well, what have you done to try to, the whole graffiti? All these questions that everybody's asking now, but nobody wanted to answer them because the people that were in front of me had no social studies, awareness, sensitivity, cultural understanding. They were engineers. They were like white men who were like, huh? Like, why are you asking me this? And I'm like, because why wasn't there someone on your design team asking these questions? Like, so I had to look like the idiot, right? The one like angry Latina who was like, well, come on, like, this is, people are going to get really upset. They're going to tag this bridge because it's gentrified. And nobody got the symbolism. And I said, you guys are not aware that, and people just wanted me to approve. And I was like, am I going to, and I chickened out and I said, oh my God, I'm going to be that angry, like ethnic person who's going to like point out stuff that, so anyway, I basically voted for it because I knew they wanted to build it. They're like, already we're behind and we have to get it approved, and then I'm like, okay, all right, well then great, see what happens, right?
And to the extent that there's all this conversation around, the tagging, obviously street art and public murals are so important to the history of Boyle Heights. And I remember even as a CRA commissioner years ago, we talked about using alleys for public art as something that was a good thing for the city. What is your thought on using the bridge as a source of artistic expression?
So. I think there should be sections where it say, make your mark here, because everybody wants to make a mark in the world. That's why people are artists. We want to make our mark, So I think if you allow that and said, oh my God, you're right. Everybody wants to make a mark. That's why people have tattoos. That's why people do certain things. But if we do it in a healthy way where we welcome that expression, and then, we do close the bridge and say, God, people love this. And also I love the idea of people walking to one side or the other. White people can walk to one side or the other and be like, oh my God, Latinos are not that scary. It's okay. Wow, not all white people are gentrifiers or, going to take over my building, I think it could be an opportunity, actually, very symbolically, to have programming.
And bridging.
Because, I would love to do theater on that bridge.
Theater on the
and
bridge.
Be like, can we bring some like bleachers and do theater in the round, and then people share their stories of their fears of gentrification or their fears of the other. Here's an opportunity to say, wow, it's literally a bridge. Let's find the bridge between all these communities. Wow, that would be great. Maybe a festival called The Bridge,
Maybe that's a new idea that we just conceived today, Theater on the Bridge.
Theater of the Bridge, like festival.
And I think
Alfred, how do you view this bridge?
Sure. I have a lot of ideas. Of course, I work in development and infrastructure. And Josefina is right. The city historically, and it's not unique to Los Angeles, we think of infrastructure as purely, functional. We don't think about it as multimodal. We don't think about it as a tool for healing community, for restoring the environment, for building, a new sort of a baseline for opportunity in our community. So, and I think that's changing. I think the way that we are citing, and we'll have an opportunity to do that with the 4th Street Bridge, by the way, because the same structural issues that catalyzed the reconstruction of the 6th Street Bridge are the same that exist in the 4th Street Bridge. So there'll be another opportunity to learn from what we're doing. The second thing is that the story about our bridge is also about over-policing public space. Is how do you give folks an opportunity to activate the space without feeling like they're being, without any concern of being arrested or being denied access.
When you look at the Golden Gate Bridge, right? One of the things that's unique is that they actually created a passageway because they figured that people would love to be on that bridge, right? So they had this idea of like, oh, wow, people actually want to walk on things. I know in LA nobody wants to walk, but hey, maybe people do want to walk on this bridge. They also have suicide hotlines, like posts like everywhere, and phones, So they really are aware of the pedestrian, and so I think we're lacking that idea that, wow, we could make this a pedestrian-friendly bridge.
Have we missed the mark here as a city then with regards to this particular project?
I think so, because they figured, that people are just going to drive through this bridge. That nobody wants to go to Boyle Heights. That, this idea of like, you just go through Boyle Heights. That's why, the freeways were put in a way that you never have to go through East LA or Boyle Heights. The idea is, you don't want to go to that side. The east side is where you don't go unless you want to go get drugs, and all the bad stuff, So this mentality is still there of like, just drive through there.
And my hope is, Dwayne, that the story hasn't yet been completely written. I think there's still opportunities for us to activate the ground floor. There are parks that are funded that should be built, that I hope we do it in the right way, that increases access, that promotes arts and culture, that gives people a sense of ownership over those public spaces. Like I said, one of my biggest concerns generally in Los Angeles is that the only open space that we're building is privatized. It's in malls. And many people don't have either access because of transportation challenges or the financial resources to access those. And they're over commoditized. You have to check in with Wi-Fi and they're monitoring your move, and you got to buy something there expensive to be able to enjoy the waterfalls and the manicured lawns. I think that we need to double down on the investment of public infrastructure. And there's opportunities to do that. We're not going to have the freeways forever, right? How can we return some of these infrastructure spaces into community spaces, greenifying them, making them more accessible? But also being mindful of erasure, because our community has looked at that infrastructure as a canvas. We've had many artists that have occupied the river in the way that it exists today and created murals. We've had stories of Asco, Leo Limon, a bunch of other artists that have said, you know what, this is us. This is about us. We're going to write our stories on wherever we can, and the river is one of those canvases. And so my concern about this idea of kayaking on the river and restoring the river to a, quote, natural state is also about erasure. So we got to do it in a way that's balanced, that factors community input, and that honors the legacy of art and art interventions in these spaces.
Josefina, are you involved in the commission for this other bridge project?
No, I'm not. I should. You know, the other thing is I realized I can only take on so many battles, right? Because I go, at the end of the day, I'm trying to be a writer. I'm trying to be a screenwriter. I'm going, you have deadlines, girl. And I'm like, okay, choose certain battles. No, I'm not. But I'm like thinking, wait a minute. Because, you know, part of it is I'm trying to focus on certain things and try to just make Boyle Heights Museum a priority. Yeah. Right.
Well, let's talk about that. You know, you've both obviously been, longtime, residents, been involved in these larger civic conversations, but you've also have your own projects going on in the community. And I know, for Josefina, you've started and you founded a number of ventures, including, Casa 0101 Theater. You've been involved with the restaurant, Casa Fina. Tell us about some of your initiatives and what's next for you.
Within the theater, I started an initiative called Chicanas, Cholas, and Chisme.
Oh,
Chisme
really?
means gossip, yeah.
Okay.
And it's a program to teach Latinas how to write, direct, and produce.
Okay.
It's been the most successful program we've had. We've mentored over, I guess, maybe 50 Latina women to write, direct, and produce plays. And they've written at least 100 plays by now.
Wow.
Short plays, but 100. And because, in the American theater, there's so few female theater directors. And I was like, and there's hardly any Latinas. So I said, we cannot just tell stories about Latinas. We have to include Latinas in every part of the process. So we've been so successful. We have so many women making films now.
That's great.
Doing podcasts, doing all sorts, starting their own production companies, right? Then I started a program called Brown and Out, which is a theater festival celebrating Latino LGBTQ stories. We've written at least 50 stories, including the first Latino LGBTQ musical called Arena, which just premiered last June. And so we've made history. And also, I started mentoring a writer who wrote the first trilingual play, English, Spanish, and American Sign Language, right? And so we made history and herstory at our theater with so many different initiatives. I also started BH Life, which now is called Life, Latina Independent Film Extravaganza, which is a Latina film festival that celebrates Latina film directors to try to mentor more Latina film directors. I also started the Boyle Heights Museum exhibitions in the art gallery and the theater, but we're going to become an independent museum. I'm also, and this is something you don't know about me, but I'm also training as a shaman, as a curandera.
Oh, really? Wow.
My great-grandmother was a healer, a shaman, and my grandmother as well. I didn't know this. I didn't know this is also why I'm doing what I'm doing, because when we tell our stories, we tell the truth, and somebody witnesses our pain and our truth, we can heal it, right? That's all you need to do theater. is you tell the truth, someone witnesses, and you can heal. So I think that's also why I'm an artistic director.
Yeah.
I thought I was just an artistic director, but I'm actually a shaman in training. So one of my dreams is to become a paranormal expert and open a paranormal museum in Los Angeles.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Tell us about Casa 0101. How long has it been in operation, and how many shows per year are you producing?
Well, it's been open for 20 years. 20 years. We have produced over maybe 225 plays, musicals, theatrical performances, film festivals. I mean, maybe 300, all the stuff we've done. We used to be crazy and do 12 plays a year. Now we're like, okay, no. Now we started doing 6.
Okay.
But unfortunately, due to AB 5, which forces people to treat actors as full-time employees, which is not appropriate for a theater, we really can't produce theater anymore.
Yeah.
We really are at a point where we're saying, oh my God, we can maybe produce 1 play or 2 plays a year. It did not help the community that was supposed to help. It actually hindered all these little theaters.
Yeah.
And so we are struggling with that because now we're thinking maybe we should just become an educational institution and just train people in theater, because there's no way we can financially continue to produce more than 2-3 plays a year.
Yeah.
It's really sad. Anyway, yeah.
And you've referenced a couple of times BHM, Boyle Heights Museum. What is the status of this, and is there the goal to have a physical museum?
Yes. And with when? Councilman, he's no longer councilman, I think, with Gil Cedillo, who's a Chicano activist and an amazing leader. He and Dr. George Sanchez and a couple other people, we are, they've already found sort of a location. They have an architectural firm. We have barrio planners already designing it. And I think we're just looking for the funding. And Dr. George Sanchez is in charge of, the historical aspect. And I'm in charge of kind of the curation of exhibits. Also how to make it not just be a museum, but a living museum, like something that really would attract young people and makes history and her story come alive.
Yeah, that's great. And Alfred, I know you've been sort of like the land use godfather for a number of initiatives there. I think we were so grateful last year to have Betty Avila from Self Help Graphics on, and she referenced your support for finding their particular building. A number of folks have mentioned that Alfred was the one behind getting them their building and getting started, and you started something called City Labs Boyle Heights. Tell us about that.
Sure. I mentioned my experience of working with a nonprofit that was getting displaced. And so I decided that I would create a space by acquiring land right close to the 6th Street Bridge, actually, on Clarence and 6th Street, and incubate a co-working space for nonprofits where we would enable them to operate from our facility at a below market cost, with the one condition that they'd be serving the community. And it was really great timing. The Latino Equality Alliance, LEA, and the LGBT Center was looking for space and to serve the community in the community, and they elected our City Labs as the incubation space where they would open a LGBT resource center. So we opened the first LGBT resource center for youth in Boyle Heights on our property. And we had people knocking on our doors before it was officially opened. We're running PFLAG meetings in Spanish. We have a salon for young people to come and learn about their bodies and their sexuality to get services. And we were running a food pantry during the pandemic. The building the property is comprised of several buildings. And one of them is actually was when I purchased the property, was a liquor store. Unfortunately, it sort of was run as a stereotypical store where it was only selling liquor in the community next to the housing projects there, Morna Gardens. And once the lease ran out, it unfortunately happened in the middle of the pandemic, so I had an empty storefront that I had a choice. Do I want to lease it to have someone else run another liquor store? Or do I take the steps and learn how to run a truly community-serving market? So my husband and I, we opened Pico Market, which is a legitimate bodega with fresh produce. And we opened it in the middle of the pandemic. We had no business doing that.
Oh, wow.
But we wanted to serve the neighborhood and take, again, agency and trust our gut that there was a need in the community to have a location that was walking distance from their home where they can get essential goods. And we finally hit the black, so to speak. We're hiring 3 people from the community.
Nice.
We are EBT and WIC certified, and it's been an incredible journey. I think for me, it's been this incredible honor to be able to introduce a new resource in the neighborhood that doesn't replicate the old business model.
And have it be successful financially as well.
Well, I always say we're not running a charity, but we're doing good for the community. And if you change your business model slightly and are less greedy, you can run something really successful.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you mentioned the work of the LGBT Center there, because we did touch on this with our episode 68 guest, Lori Jean of the LA LGBT Center. And one of the things we talked about is their ability to expand beyond core areas like Hollywood and West Hollywood, and to bring these services to communities of color in South LA and in East LA and Boyle Heights. So I think we did talk about Mi Centro there. Yeah. That's great. You both are very engaged, and Josefina, you talked about your other various business ventures that you have going on, and sometimes time is of the essence. Would you sense that as we think about community engagement here on Civitas LA, would you say that folks are very engaged? Are young people getting involved in the civic conversations of the day? Is it accessible for others to jump in and join in and participate?
I think there's an abundance of opportunities for participation if you know how to look and you're open-minded. If you're willing to follow your heart and follow the stories that we've heard today on this podcast, Dwayne. I'm hopeful for our community. I think that there's abundance of resource in terms of creativity and human capital, and all we have to know is how to look and how to ask the right questions.
Yeah, outstanding. I appreciate you both being on here. Josefina, you want to add to that? Go.
Yeah, I'm very impressed by young people because the role of young people is to keep telling the truth and to tell the adults what BSers they are. So I love how young people are bold and courageous, and just, I have ADD, so I'm still like a little kid where I still tell people that I still haven't learned. And so I'm very impressed, what they just call the shots and they call the truth, and I love that. So I think we're in good hands, even though sometimes I worry, about young people doing too much social media. I realize that they're much more awake than we are. So I'm inspired.
Well, thank you both for that. This has been really great, and sort of like you, Josefina, I've got a little ADD. I just love doing things. I love the learning. I love the learning, particularly on this podcast, about communities that I don't get to experience as often. So this has been great. But before I let you both go, we always love the lightning round, and the lightning round gives our listeners an opportunity to get the true inside skinny on these respective communities. So. This gives us a chance to learn some of your favorites about not only LA, but also Boyle Heights for our visitors who come to LA. Are you ready to share with us a few insider hotspots?
Well, I mean, if it's fair, I will tell you that Casa Fina has some of the best Mexican food. Okay. But I do love L&B's burritos. Okay.
Okay. So you have jumped the gun in terms of favorite restaurants. Josefina.
Yeah, Casa Fina and L&B's and Guisados. I mean, it's so amazing to be in Boyle Heights because we have the best Mexican food. I mean, hands down.
Amen
no
to
competition.
That. Everyone loves guisados.
Guisados, yes. Guisados, yeah. Okay. Well, hopefully we'll have parrilla in Casa Fina too.
Alfred, give us a favorite restaurant or two.
Casa Fina, for sure. Come check it out. Have some fun and invest in the community.
Okay. We love getting together for a sip of something, whether that's a libation or tea or coffee. Give us a favorite place to take a sip. Josefina.
I can't keep promoting my I mean, I'm there all the time having meetings because what I do is I want everybody from the community to meet there. And the whole point of the restaurant was to make it affordable and accessible. Yeah. So I would say that that's the one place, because you know what? There's hardly any places to have full liquor licenses. So that's the one place you actually can have a real margarita.
Okay.
Amen to that. I would agree with that.
I'm coming by for a margarita after the episode. Alfred?
And it's a great lunch place. You can go from downtown and have a great meal, indoor and outdoor. So I would encourage people to check it out.
Other than Josefina, Alfred, do you have a favorite place to take a sip?
I don't drink, so...
it could be tea, coffee.
I love the First Street walkability, so I go to Monarca there, right next to Casa Fina. I've been to Eastside Love. I go to Jim's Burgers as well. I keep it real and get a hamburger special. It's all great. But if you are interested in getting some good food and being enriched culturally, just take a walk. Start at the metro station there at Mariachi Plaza and go all the way to Soto and beyond.
Okay.
And then there's Un Solo Sol, which is vegan, which is also
That's right.
a great restaurant. Yeah.
Excellent. So, you're visiting from New York, Boston, or wherever. Give us a favorite place to take a visitor. Josefina.
I guess I'd start at Mariachi Plaza.
Okay. Excellent.
And because there's the historic Boyle Heights Hotel.
Excellent.
And it's just it's a great place.
Wonderful.
I was just there this morning. I would do the same.
Okay.
I also like taking people to El Mercadito, which is just outside of Boyle Heights, but on the way.
Okay.
You can start at Mariachi Plaza and make your way further east. El Mercadito is a great hodgepodge of small businesses. You can find anything from your latest, trendiest boots and belts and hats. If you're a vaquero, you can get some decent food, and you can bring some special spices back home to make some mole.
Well, if you want decent food, go to Casa Fina. That's what we say
right.
here. Give us a favorite outdoor space. We love our open space here in Los Angeles. Give us a favorite park or hike in the community. Alfred, any thoughts on that?
I like, which is probably undervalued real estate, is taking a walk all the way up from General Hospital to the old General Hospital. There's incredible views in that area near Marengo. Go check it out. And you see life happening all over the place. There's a wellness center that is on the first floor of the old General Hospital building. They have a number of activities there and resources for the community, and there's spectacular views.
Never knew that. Excellent.
The
Josefina.
State Park is so beautiful. I love going there. I always escape to State Park, and I forget I'm in LA in a city. I really feel like I'm in the woods somewhere.
And we need that for healing.
Yeah, and Hollenbeck Park is also wonderful.
Yeah, excellent. We love the fact that community activities and events are coming together again, and people are coming together again in our diverse communities. Give us a favorite local community activity or event. Josefina.
Well, I love going to Self-Help Graphics when they have their craft fair, because it's a great place to go get Christmas gifts.
Excellent.
And Day of the Dead, at Self-Help Graphics.
I went to Dia de los Muertos last year at Self-Help Graphics and bought some art.
I would say the same. Self-Help Graphics for Dia de los Muertos. They also have an incredible market for right before Christmas for anything that you want. So check it out.
Excellent. I really appreciate this. This is outstanding. As we say on CivitasLA, however, the guest gets the final word. Give us a final thought or a call to action that you'd like to share with our audience today. Josefina.
Join us in collecting stories about Boyle Heights. Join us in preserving our American history, which belongs to everyone.
Mr. Fraijo.
I would say stay engaged, stay curious, be open to new ideas, and come visit us in Boyle Heights with a sense of a wonder, a respect, a willingness to give back and invest in the community that we so love.
Outstanding. This has been a great conversation. I really appreciate you taking time on this Saturday to join me here in studio. You both have so many wonderful things going on that we can only hope that those who listen are inspired to join you and or replicate that work that you're doing. So we hope to have you back on to share the work that as it progresses. Before we close this particular episode, I just want to again thank our friends at the Vermont Slauson Economic Development Corporation for their support of our Hispanic Heritage Month series, and really appreciate all that they do to support small Black and brown businesses across our region. And we certainly invite you to learn more about them at www.vsedc.org and check out their upcoming 60-second business pitch competition for Latino-owned startups and small businesses taking place again October 6th. And as always, to our audience, thank you for joining us. We hope you enjoyed this program. We hope you will share this program with others, and we hope you'll return and join us in 2 weeks as we continue our Hispanic Heritage Month series, as we'll be joined by Mr. Arturo Snyder of Prime Store Development, Inc. And as we say on Civitas LA, until we meet again, stay strong, and get involved. To learn more about CivitasLA and share feedback on this program, or if you have a recommendation about future programs, please visit our website at www.civitasla.com. And connect with us on Facebook at CivitasLA, Instagram at Civitas_LA, and Twitter at Civitas_LA.